Hi, folks. Welcome back. This is Jeff Sachs, Web Yeshiva. We are here in Masechet Taanit, and the learning today on Web Yeshiva, on all of our shiurim, is dedicated to the refuah shalema of Ophir ben Etelbraina Eliana, Ophir Agassi, who is a very dear Talmud of ours, and going back to Yeshivat HaMiftar, and he's in need of a refuah shlema, and his parents have dedicated the day of learning in that merit, and we send them all our best tefillot and best wishes and all our love, that he and his family, his parents, his wife, his children, everybody should have a lot of good strength as he comes through this for refuah shlema, refuah nefesh, refuah aguf. Okay, we are here on Daf Kaf Aleph Omid Aleph. Again, another very well-known Agadah. We'll try to just get through the text of the Agadah tonight. It's an Agadah which is very, very well known, but surprisingly, not a whole lot is written on it, partially because it's really one of those Agadot that speaks for itself. It is the Agadah of Nachum Ish Gam Zu. What's it doing here? Well, it's piggybacking onto this ongoing theme and topic of rickety walls and rickety buildings that fall down or don't fall down or are held up in the merit of the righteous who are dwelling in them, as you'll see. But aside from that somewhat tangential hook, the story, really could be anywhere. And in fact, the story does appear elsewhere, of course, in Shas. So Amru Alav al Nachum Ish Gam Zu. Gam Zu is presumably the yeshuv of Gam Zu, which is, in the center north of the country, like not far from Lod, not terribly far from the airport. And presumably his name, Gam Zu, is a play on words for Gimzu, that he was from this place, Gimzu, but his motto was Gam Zu LeTova, so Gam Zu, etc. The exact identity of this Nachum Ish Gam Zu is not much is known. There's some speculation in the scholarship about who he was. There is a kever up in Tzvat, which purports to be the grave site, the burial site of Nachum Ish Gam Zu. You've probably been there when passing through on some tiyul. That's all the background that we need for the story. So Amru Alav al Nachum Ish Gam Zu Shahaya. Listen to this. Suma b'shtei einav, blind in both eyes. Gideim b'shtei yadav. He both of his hands were amputated. Kiteya b'shtei raglav. He was missing both feet, or both legs. V'chol gufo malei shchin, and what little bit he had left was covered in boils. Right? In other words, this guy, he's got nothing going for him. Right? He's it's just a terrible scene of physical anguish and a terrible situation. And not only that, haya mutal bevayat ra'ua. Right? He spent his days on a bed in a rickety old house. That's the connection to the earlier themes in our Gemara. V'raglei mitato munachim b'sfalim shel mayim kedei shelo ya'alu alav nimalim. And the house is full of ants, and poor guy, he's like, he's in his bed, and the ants are crawling over him, right? And he can't, since he has no arms, he can't even swat away the ants off of his sores and boils. So they put the four legs of his bed into little buckets of water, because the ants can't go across the water to get up onto the posts, to get up onto the bed. It's like a bad situation. Pamachat bikshu talmidav lifanot mitato, achar kach lifanot et hakelim. So his students suggested that they move his bed and then they're going to move him. They're going to try to maybe move him to a better situation. So they're going to move him. They're going to carry him out on his cot, and then they're going to take his whatever possessions he has and move him elsewhere. So these Talmidim, this Nachum Gam Zu, who there's only really one halachic statement recorded in his name, but apparently he was a Tana of some note, and among his Talmidim is counted none other than Rabbi Akiva. According to tradition, Rabbi Akiva's manner of darshaning psukim, of the ribui, Rabbi Akiva famously had this way of reading psukim that, for example, whenever there's an et, that, what's the part of speech of an et? The indicator of the direct object, right? Ve'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, right? Kabed et avicha ve'et imecha. We don't translate those words. That's why when foreigners are learning Hebrew, it's like it's a signature mark of somebody who's not a native Hebrew speaker, right? Because in your head you think, honor your mother and father. So you can translate that perfectly as kabed avicha ve'imecha. Because since the word et, it's just a grammatical sign. It doesn't mean a word, right? It just shows that the object of the kavod, of the respect, is your father and your mother, right? So you skip it by accident in translating from thinking in English into thinking in Hebrew. So Rabbi Akiva had a tradition which he received from Nachum Gam Zu, that those etin, those were they're placeholders for other halachot. So, for example, what does it mean, kabed et avicha, right? Honor your father. Also, lirabot, to include, to add, also your older siblings, for example. So, Nachum Gam Zu, he had Talmidim, and the Talmidim said, "No, Rebbe, let's get you out of here." So, what does he say? He says, Amar lahem bonai, panu et hakelim v'achar kach panu et mitati. First, take all of my possessions out of the house, and then take me out last. Shemuftach lachem shekol zman shani b'vayit ein habayit nofel. Because the house is only standing up in my merit, like the cases we saw previously about the wall and the house. If the house is only standing up in my merit, if you were to take me out first, the house would collapse and whatever property I had would be demolished, which would have been so typical for this poor guy. Nothing seems to be going right for him. So pinu et hakelim v'achar kach pinu mitato v'nafal habayit. And that's exactly what happened. They took out all of his possessions, then they carried him out, and then boom, the house came collapsing. That, for our purposes, is the story of Nachum Gam Zu. However, the Gemara, having introduced the character of Nachum Gam Zu, tells us the other stories of his life. Amrulo Talmidav. The students ask him. They ask him the question, right? The big question. The question of all questions. Amrulo Talmidav, Rabbi, v'chi ma'achar shetzadik gamurata, lama alta lachakach. Since you are such a truly righteous person, why did all of these things happen to you? In other words, they ask him the question of tzaddik v'ralo. You are a great, holy, righteous rabbi with many merits. Why are you suffering so? No eyes, no hands, no feet, covered in boils, ants crawling all over you. Amar lahem, he says to them, Bonai, ani garamti la'atzmi. I am the cause of everything that has happened to me. And why? And he tells the following story. Shapam achat haiti mehalech baderech levet chami. Once I was walking along the way, I was going to my father-in-law's house. One wonders what's the significance of this being a trip to his father-in-law's house. Or in fact, we wonder who his father-in-law was, but we do not have an answer for that. V'haya imi masoi shlosha chamurim. And I had three laden donkeys. I had three donkeys. Each one was carrying a pack. Echad shel machal, one had food. V'echad shel mishteh, and one had drink. V'echad shel kol minei, v'echad minei megadim, and one had all types of tasty treats. Right? So it sounds like a guy that everything is going well for him, right? Three donkeys, food and drink and tasty treats. I mean, maybe megadim. Megadim probably means like tasty treats, food, but it could also be like he just had other precious items. And as I'm traveling with my three donkeys full of all the good things, I encounter a poor person in the way. V'amarli Rabbi Parnaseni, Rabbi, help me out, support me, give me a little something, right? You know, this is what we see this every day. You're walking down the street and there's somebody there asking for tzedakah. Amarti lo hamtein ad she efruk min hachamur. Wait until I unload the donkey. In other words, he's going to give him some food or he's going to give him something, but he has to first get off his donkey, and he has to then go and search around in the pack and give him. Lo hispakti lefrok min hachamur ad sheyatzta nishmato. And until I was done draying around with my fancy packs and my three donkeys and my wealth of food and drink and goodies, the guy dropped dead. Halachti v'nafalti al panav. I went and I fell face to face. V'amarti, einai shelo chasu aleinecha yasumu. My eyes, which did not have mercy on your eyes, my eyes should be blinded. Yodai shelo chasu al yodecha. My hands, which did not have compassion on your hands, yitgademu, right, should be chopped off. Raglai shelo chasu al raglecha. My feet on your feet, yitkatau. My feet should be chopped off. Below nitkara dati ad shamarti, and I couldn't calm down until I also added v'chol gufi and also stick me with boils. Amrulo oy lanu. The Talmidim say to him, oy gevalt sherauncha bakach, that we see you in this terrible state. Amar lahem oily im lo re'ituni bakach, and woe unto me if you hadn't seen me in this way, right? Presumably because his suffering, he felt, was some kind of kapara. But the question obviously has to be asked. You know, like you can imagine a different story. There's a rabbi walking. You remember the story? Rabbi walking along the way, ugly guy in the road. He says, "How come you're so ugly?" So he had to kind of like dance on the head of a pin to try to explain, why it wasn't as bad as it seems. And it wasn't such a satisfying answer. Doesn't that sound like somebody that should suffer? So here, Nachamish Gam Zu, what did he do wrong? Right? He sees a poor person. He jumps off his donkey. I added that part. But let's imagine he was also riding on a donkey. So he had to get off the donkey in order to get to the trunk of the car. Right? So it's not like he says, "Get out of my way, poor man." And then the poor man drops dead and Nachamish Gam Zu says, "Oi, what did I do?" And it's not like he gave him tzedakah, but he did it very stingily. Right? I mean, it happens sometimes that like like somebody will put their hand out and you only have like 30 agarot in your pocket, right? So you give them 30 agarot, 20 agarot, which is like nothing. You go to the store, they don't even give you the 10 agarot anymore for change because it's not worth anything. But that's all you have. So you give it to them and you feel a little bad, right? Because could you be any cheaper? But unfortunately, the aniyim haven't yet figured out a way. Do you find this? I find that I go sometimes weeks at a time without any cash with hardly any cash in my pocket, right? And the aniyim, they don't take bit, and they don't take paybox, and you can't do Apple Pay on your phone right to them. So we're living in a world where cash is becoming increasingly rare. So this can't be good for the beggar's economy. So
There was
it's not
a guy
like,
that came to our shul that he had a little credit card machine with him.
oh yeah, well
Yeah.
he was probably collecting for an institution, no?
No, he was. I don't know. I don't think so. I don't know.
Really?
I don't know.
Those are expensive. Those are and the credit card companies take a big amala.
Well, it's a good investment.
Right? I was, if you've ever been to the National Library, David, I know you've been to the National Library, but the National Library downstairs they have like a place with coffee sandwiches, rugelach, like a normal type of thing. But it's the only place in the National Library to get something to eat or drink. So everybody that spends time in the library goes down there. It's the last place in the country that does not take credit cards, right? You have to have cash. So I said this, this is crazy. Like it's the last place. I had to go borrow money from somebody, from a friend in the library, in order to get my cup of coffee and my sandwich. They say that they work on such a low profit margin, just selling coffee and Danish. They such a low profit margin that on every sale you'll lose a certain achuz to the credit card company, and then there's on top of that there's like a monthly fee for unless you do a certain amount of business, there's a monthly fee for the credit card reader and all these other things. It's not worth it to them. So that's the problem that most that except for Shalom travels with very well heeled aniyim that accept credit cards, but but most aniyim don't have this. So it's not like Nachum Ish Gam Zu hands the guy 10 agorot, and then the guy drops dead, and Nachum Ish Gam Zu realizes, oh my God, why was I so cheap? I killed him. Here he's like unpacking his bags to give him machal and mishteh and kol minei matamim, and the guy can't hold out, and he drops dead. And Nachum Ish Gam Zu feels the responsibility for this. And he says, my eyes should go blind, and my hands should be chopped off, and my legs should be amputated, and whatever is left of me should be covered in boils. And when the Talmudim see his suffering and are disturbed by it, he says, it's good that you see my suffering, because my suffering is my atonement. It's my kapara. I mean, that's my interpretation of what he's saying, but I presume that's what it means.
There's a different way of the story could have gone. I mean, if we're trying to understand why he felt so guilty about it, what if, I mean, the guy was obviously on death's door, maybe he was about, hadn't eaten or hadn't had anything to drink in days or whatever it was. And, it wasn't just money, because the money wouldn't have prevented him from dying at that point. So
Right.
maybe he had like a little food in his hand. Maybe he had like something he could give him, which would have allowed him to, so he felt, if he felt actually responsible for his death by telling him to wait a minute, not just in terms of his attitude or his, something more distant, but he actually could have saved his life, and he would have felt that he was responsible for life, and that might have been.
So presumably that's the case, except there's no textual hint that that is the case.
Oh, the textual hint is that he felt responsible for it.
No, obviously. So you have to have like some kind of explanation for why that is. Okay, so you see, hold on, you synchronize. So you see where we are. Vamai karu. So that's the resha of the Agadah, the story of how he came to be in such a bad matzav. Now the Gemara goes on to explain how he came to be called Ish Gam Zu. Presumably, this part of the story takes place, not presumably, clearly, I think this part of the story takes place before his terrible sufferings. V'mai karule Nochum Ish Gam Zu. Why was he called this? Dechol milta dehava salkale amar Gam Zu LeTova. No matter what happened to him, he would say, Gam Zu LeTova. This too is for the best.
You said that he was a student, that Rabbi Akiva was a student of his.
Yes.
So there's that famous story about Rabbi Akiva and the
I'll come back to that
and all that.
before the evening's over, David. Before the evening's over. Zimna chada bo leshadure Yisrael daron leve Kesar. So on one occasion, the Jews needed to send some kind of gift to the emperor. Usually this was not for his birthday or because we loved him, but it was a way of keeping our good graces. Going to the Kesar is always a little tricky, right? The Ruth Weiss has a wonderful book called Jews and Power, which kind of shows the very ambivalent relationship that Jews had to power. Throughout most of the Galut, we were always adjacent to power. After all, not for nothing did they think that we control the world. But we never really possessed power ourselves. And like the moth near the flame, it's always a little dangerous being near to power. So they would give the gift to the Kesar, and they said, Amru man Yizal, who should go and bring the gift? So Yizal Nachum ish Gam Zu. Let's send Nachum. Dimlumad ben Nisinhu, since he is very well accustomed to miraculous things happening. And sometimes you need a little miracle. Shadru bidei mlo sifta de avanim tovot margaliot. They sent a big basket, a chest full of precious jewels and pearls. Azal bat haudira. So on the way, he stops at a certain dira. He stops at I don't know, like a bread and breakfast. What do they call that? An Airbnb. Belela kamu hanach diure vishkalinhu lesifte umelanuhu afra. The hotelier steals the jewels that are in this case, and they replace it with dirt. Meaning, I guess the assumption was that in the morning he would pick it up, he wouldn't notice that it was lighter, and he would set out on his way, not knowing that they had picked his pocket. Kimata hatam, when he gets to the royal palace, shrinhu lesifta. They open up the box, the what's the word for that? Yeah, like a box, like a chest, I guess. Chazanu de milu afra. They see that it's full of dirt. Bo malka lemiktalinu lechulu. The king is going to kill all the Jews, right? Because they're making fun of him. Omar kemechaychu biyehudai. The Jews are making fun of me. They're mocking me, giving me a box full of dirt. So Omar Gam Zu LeTova. So Nachum says, no, this is all for the best. Watch, it'll all work out for the best. Ata Eliyahu. So, you're stuck. You're in a pickle. You don't know what's with the Jews. So Eliyahu Hanavi is going to show up. He's going to save the day. But Eliyahu Hanavi shows up in disguise as one of them. Nobody realizes it's Eliyahu Hanavi. They think he's just one of the Jews that are part of this lobbying mission to the king. Amarle, Dilma ha'afra ma'afadav mavu. No, why do you assume they're making fun of you by giving you this dirt? Maybe this is the dirt of Avraham Avinu. What's the dirt of Avraham Avinu? Dechi hava shode afra hava saife. Gile hava gire. Dichtiv yitein kafar charbo kakash nidaf kashto. He says, no, don't you know about Avraham Avinu? Didn't you hear those stories about Avraham Avinu fighting those kings? It's Avraham Avinu's secret weapon. You take this dirt from this box and you throw it up at your enemies, and it magically turns into swords and into arrows, as the pasuk in Yeshayahu says that his sword is and as the pasuk means that his sword will turn the enemy into dirt or into dust, and that his his bow and arrow turns them into, I don't know, gravel. So maybe this dirt, why do you think they're making fun of you? This is a very valuable gift. It's a very powerful weapon. If it's Avram Avinu's magic dirt that you just throw in the direction of your enemies and it slashes them to bits. What's that Harry Potter curse? Who? Yair! I have a Shaila. Come quick. What's the curse that Harry uses against Malfoy? That he learns from the Half-Blood Prince.
Sectum Sempra?
How do you say it?
Sectum Sempra.
Sectum Sempra, and it's like you're slashed up with knives, right? Sectum, many cuts. Sectum Sempra, right? That's what the Nochamish Gam Zu gave to the king. He gave him this Harry Potter dirt from Avram Avinu. There was a certain place that the Romans could not conquer. So they take this dirt out, to test against the enemy, and it works. Why does it work? Because Eliyahu Navi had fixed it. Umalu lesifte avanim tovot margaliot bishadru bikaraba. So they take the basket of dirt, which is now this extremely powerful weapon, and they, in return, what do they give Nochamish Gam Zu? A basket full of rubies and diamonds and pearls, so that he's not missing anything, right? In other words, he took very valuable gems to give to the king. In the end, he gave the king worthless dirt, which miraculously became very valuable dirt. And they, in return, gave him a basket full of rubies and diamonds and emeralds and pearls, which he now gets to keep for himself, or the Jewish community gets to keep. So not only have they garnered the goodwill of the king, they haven't lost a penny. Right? Gam Zu LeTova, it all worked out for the best. Because what would have happened if he had not been robbed? He would have taken $1 million worth of jewels to the king. He would have given it to the king, and the king would have said, "Thank you very much." Now he's given something which is taka worthless. It's just dirt, miraculously at no cost, changed into something very valuable. He has now earned the thanks of the king, and he still has all the gems and jewels. Gam Zu LeTova, not just Gam Zu LeTova. It's not just that things all worked out in the end. Things worked out better than they would have had the bad thing not happened to him. So ki atu beitu bahahu diura. So on the journey home, he stops at the same inn. And by the way, this is a classic trope in Agadot, in world literature, right? The journey out and the journey back. Or in the words of Tolkien, what's the real name of the Hobbit? Lasham u'v'chazara, there and back again. That's the proper name of the book. There and back again, right? All great treks, all great journeys have this idea that you go and you come back. Right? Odysseus heads out to the war. After a long delay, he comes back. That idea of Sheva Habaita. But when the hero returns, he has to revisit all the stations along the way. So this idea that on your way out to your adventure, you stopped at a particular pundak or a particular inn, and on the way back, you stop there again. Well, that is throughout world literature. You will see this. Don Quixote goes out on his adventure, right? At the inn that they stay in, all types of mischief happen, and on the way back, they put up at the very same inn, and there's a kind of tikkun for what happened in one direction on the way back, right? Sam and Frodo and the hobbits stop at the sign of the prancing pony in Bree. you can be sure on the way back they're going to do the same. Nachum ish Gam Zu stops at a house where he gets robbed, and on the way back he stops at the same house, even though he knows that these are the people that robbed him. And Kiatu Beta Hau Diura, he stops at the same place. Amrule, my tit bahadech the avdelach yekara kulahai. What'd you do that they in the royal court they treated you with such glory, with such yakar, with such kavod? So Omar lahu, my deshakli mehacha am telatam. What I took from here, meaning the basket full of dirt, I brought to there. So they can't believe he's still alive. You know, a guy shows up at the king with a box full of dirt, right? They should have killed him. So they want to know. Satru lidiraihu va'amtinu leve malka. So they tear down their house, dig up all the dirt under the foundation, and with ox carts, you imagine, they carry it off to the king's palace. Because if Nachum ish Gam Zu brought one basket of dirt and was so honored, so it's worth it to us to tear down our whole house and bring all of the topsoil to the king. Imagine the glory that will be done to us. So Amrule, Hai Afra, the Aite Hocha Mididanu. That dirt, the magic dirt that you got, that's our dirt. And look, we've brought you even more. Honor us. But what did Nachum ish Gam Zu have that they don't have?
Eliyahu.
Eliyahu Hanavi. They didn't have the nes. In other words, the dirt is just dirt, right? Unless you add the nes of Eliyahu Hanavi, it remains just dirt. Right? And that's why Nahum was sent, because the leadership understood that a mission to the Caesar requires a little bit of a nes. So what happened? The Romans checked the dirt of the innkeeper. They saw that it was really just dirt, and they killed him. The end. That is essentially all we know about Nachum ish Gam Zu. You're often very good sports. You let me make reference to Agnon from time to time, not just because of my own love for Agnon, but because you know how it is. If I have this material in my head, it sometimes just spills out. It happens that the Nachum ish Gam Zu stories appear quite frequently, not on the surface of the text, but somehow underneath it in Agnon's writings. I refer you specifically to the story Hamit Pachat. In English, it's called The Kerchief. I'd be happy to send it to you in Hebrew or in English if you'd like to see what he does with the story there. But this is from a work, I'll call it a work of nonfiction. In addition to his stories, for which he won the Nobel Prize, Agnon, like many other figures of his generation, most notably Bialik, was an anthologizer of classic Jewish sources. Bialik's Sefer HaGadah being the most famous example. It was the bar mitzvah present of choice for many years. Perhaps you got the Sefer HaGadah as a bar mitzvah present, or have given it as a bar mitzvah present. There are new editions. Every generation gets a new edition of the Sefer HaGadah. There's one that came out a few years ago by Avigdor Shinan, put out a new edition of the Sefer HaGadah. So Agnon, in cooperation with Martin Buber, put out a collection of the Hasidic tales. Now, Agnon didn't write these tales. He polished them, he rewrote them, but he anthologized the Hasidic tales. Agnon's contribution was the Sipurei Habesht, of the stories of the Baal Shem Tov. He anthologized tales of the Baal Shem Tov from the library of classic Hasidic works of storytelling. So listen to this story. It's called LeTova. Siper harav tzaddik Reb Yaakov Aryeh Zal meTurbin. פעם אחת נסעו שני חסידים גדולים אל הבשט על שבת קודש. Once two great Hasidim were going to the Baal Shem Tov for Shabbos. B'derech pagu berichba achat shehalcha lefneihem. But on those kind of narrow Polish dirt roads, there was a wagon in front of them. The Hebrew here is very precise. This is the Hebrew
Like
of
the road-
Hasidic tales. It's not
Like
an
the road going
Agalah.
up,
It's not
like
an
the road
Agalah.
going up to Efrat Zion.
Exactly. If
With a
there's
big truck.
if there's a slow truck in front of you, you can't pass it. You're just stuck. But notice the language of a Hasidic text. It's not an Agalah. It's a Merkava. Velo yachla l'nsoa b'mrutza. They couldn't go fast because they were stuck behind the slow-moving vehicle. V'tocha Merkava yashav sar echad, and there was a Polish nobleman sitting in this carriage. ומחמת שחסידים יראו לנטות מן הדרך ולעבור לפני מרכבת השר, הוכרחו גם הם לנסוע אחר המרכבה לאט. So they were stuck moving slowly behind this slow-moving carriage. אמר אחד לחברו, יש לי צער גדול מזה. This is very problematic. I feel bad about this. שאם תמשך נסיעתם, כך לא נגיע אצל הבשת על השבת. We'll be late. We won't get to the Baal Shem Tov for Shabbos. אמר לו חברו, B'tuchani b'Hashem Yisborach. I've got great faith in the Almighty. Shekol ze LeTova. It'll all work out for the best. Amar lo lechavero, ilu haita b'zman ha'chorban, haita omer gam kein shu LeTova. So his friend says to him, you're off your rocker. If you were there at Churban Bayis Sheni, if you were there at the destruction of the Holy Temple, you would say this is also for the best. Right? There are two different approaches to life. One says, okay, we're in a problem, Gam Zu LeTova, and the other one says you're crazy. Right? What could be worse than not getting to the Baal Shem Tov for in other words, not getting to the Baal Shem Tov in time for Shabbos is like equated with Churban Abayit. B'toch nesiatam, ba'u lamakom tsar asher ein sham derech lentot yamin u'smol. They can't move right or left. They're stuck in this narrow lane. V'sham amdu agalot harbe mleot chaviyot im. I don't know if this is chalav or chalev, right? Whether it's barrels full of milk or barrels full of fat. But let's say it's barrels full of fat, like shuman. So they get someplace and there's like a lot of traffic. That is, they're stuck behind the slow moving carriage, and they get to a place where there's all the wagons are, Keystone Cops. They can't move because one of the wagons has broken down, and biglala lo hayu shar hagalot yecholot lazuz mimkoman, and nobody could move because there was one wagon broken down. Keshegia merkavat hasar lesham tzak hasar lifnot lo makom. But the nobleman gets there and he says, make way, make way. The goyim are called arelim, those uncircumcised heathens have to make way, and they have to take the barrels of shuman off the wagons in order to push the wagon that's broken down aside to let the traffic through. So then they were able to move. And once they got past that intersection, you know how it is, like you're behind that truck, and finally that slow-moving truck, it turns right and you're going straight and you're in the clear. So the cynic, even he has to recognize that it was all for the best. Why? Because what would have happened without the slow moving, if they hadn't been following the Sar? They would have gotten to that traffic jam. They have no clout, right? They only got through because they were right behind the, it's like, when there's a big traffic jam and an ambulance comes through and clears the way. And if you happen to be right at the right place, you can ride the wave behind the ambulance to cut through the rest of the traffic. Says this is the essential difference in the worldview between Nachum Ish Gam Zu and the students, and he says here the students of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva Amar Kol Ma Da'avid Rachmana L'Tavavid. You know, the Gemara says, the Gemara in Shabbat, the Gemara, in Brachot, has this idea of Keshem shemivorchim al hatov, kach mivorchim al hara. We don't always know what's good and what's bad. Our sense of how the world works is a little skewed. We have a sense of what's good, we have a sense of what's bad, but that's not always the case. Things that we sometimes think are bad are actually for the best, and sometimes things that are good turn out in the long run not to be very good for us. And the Gemara says that just like there's a bracha for the good things that happen to you, so too we say a bracha even on the apparent bad things. And that's what Rabbi Akiva says, Kol ma da'avid rachmana l'tov. Everything that God does is always for the best. Hainu shadavar be'etzem hu ra, kemo she'ira lo b'chamuro v'tarnogolo. The thing itself is bad. And then the Baal Shem Tov makes reference to the story of the Rabbi Akiva's Chamor and Tarnagol. Now this is a Gemara in Brachot Daf Samech Amud Bet 60b. The Gemara, I'm sorry, I don't have it here to put on the screen, but the Gemara over there says that Rabbi Akiva says a person should always say that whatever happens, whatever God does, he does for the best. So the Gemara tells a story that Rabbi Akiva was once walking along a road, and he comes to a certain place, and he can't find any place. There's no room at the inn, so he says, you're traveling in a strange place, and you have no place to sleep, so you're going to be homeless for the night. But he says, Kol ma David Rachmana l'Tava. Everything God does, he does for the best. So he sleeps out in the forest or in the field, I forget what, and he had with him a rooster, a donkey, and a candle. A tarnagol, a chamor, and a ner. So along comes, the rain and the wind, and it blows out his candle. So he's out there in the field in the dark. A cat comes along and eats the rooster, and a lion comes along and eats the donkey. So he's out there in the cold, in the dark, no rooster, no donkey, no place to sleep for the night. But what happens? Kol man David Rachmana l'Tava. Everything Hashem does is for the best. That night at the inn that they wouldn't let him into, robbers come, a gedud, like the non-Jewish army comes through town and pillages everything and takes everybody, that was there off as a captive. So Rabbi Akiva was spared all that because he didn't have since his candle went out, nobody could see him out there. Since his rooster was dead, it couldn't go cock-a-doodle-doo and give him away. And since his donkey couldn't go eeyore, eeyore, the soldiers didn't hear him or go looking for the donkey and find him and take him off to captivity. So he says, you see, didn't I tell you everything that Hashem does, he does for the best? I mean, for Rabbi Akiva, one must be sensitive to the fact that others were taken off and pillaged and taken into captivity. But for Rabbi Akiva, everything worked out for the best. The Baal Shem Tov says the story about the Hasidim and the wagon is the difference between Rabbi Akiva, who admits all of those things are inherently bad. It's bad if your candle goes out in the middle of the forest, right? It's bad if you're, like you need your phone and the battery dies, right? It's bad if a lion eats your donkey and your tarnagol. But Rabbi Akiva says, Elish yatzu lo mizeh achar kach tova. But out of the bad comes something good. Aval Nachum Ish Gam Zu Amar, and here he quotes the Gemara in Sanhedrin, which is just a completely parallel text to our own. It could have said Taanit. Gam Zu LeTova. Hainu shadavar atzmo hi tov ve'ein bo shum ra. Nachum Ish Gam Zu has a different attitude. Rabbi Akiva says there are bad things that happen, but sometimes out of the bad comes good. Nachum Ish Gam Zu says even the apparently bad things are not bad. Even the apparently bad things themselves are good. Now, this might be a reflection of his own view of theodicy. It's bad to go. I mean, we would think it's bad to go blind. We would think it's bad to lose use of your limbs. It's bad to be covered in shchin. But Nachum Ish Gam Zu, he doesn't say that these are bad things, but maybe there's some benefit. He says, I look at this objective fact, blindness and lameness and boils, and I know that it is inherently good because it is the source of my kapara, of my atonement for whatever sin I feel I committed with that poor person. Kain sarich, the Baal Shem Tov goes on, Kain sarich, so he says that's what he says. Kimoshi iralo betevato shaitam le'avanim tovoro, and that's the story with the king and the dirt and the jewels. When he realized he was carrying a box full of dirt to the king, which could be potentially perilous, it could, it should have been the death of them all. He doesn't say, "Oi, this is terrible. I hope it'll turn out okay." He says, "This is good." Right? This terrible bruch that we find ourselves in, this is inherently good because it's all going to work out for the best. Kain sarich kol adam Yisrael. That's what the Baal Shem Tov says. Every person, im yikre lo chas v'shalom davar shenira lo shehu ra. If you see something that appears bad, yitaches lo etza. You should figure it out. You should you should have an understanding of what's going on. Sheyidmeh she'adavar be'etzem hu tov. The thing itself is good, says the Baal Shem Tov. Va'az yazor lo Hashem yitbarach. And then, when you're able to see the bad when you're able to see the good within the apparent bad, then Hashem will turn it all around. And that's the turnaround of the story. So it's a rather subtle reading of the difference between Nachum Ish Gam Zu and Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva, I'm not sure why here it's credited to the Talmidei Rabbi Akiva, when in the Gemara it's words in Rabbi Akiva's mouth himself. But that's the difference between Rav and Talmid on this matter. And maybe that's why Nachum Ish Gam Zu is the master of the ribui, being able to see something between the lines, being able to see the halacha that's not written explicitly, but which we can extrapolate from what's not there, right? It looks like there's no good here in this situation. But if you know how to read the situation, if you know how to know that every seemingly meaningless, different little tiny flourish in the text is there lirabot, to add and to expand and to bring us a new halacha, maybe these two tchunot are related in how you go about seeing the good amongst what appears to be bad, or understanding that the bad itself is good. Okay, that's the story of Nachum Ish Gam Zu, and hopefully we will continue next week with more Gemara Masechet Taanit.